I will introduce you to the moderator of the panel, and he will tell you who is on stage with him here. This is a veteran of the cannabis industry, and exactly, yes, and a huge force behind the legalization effort for the last several decades. Let's have a really warm welcome for Chris Conrad.
All right. Hey, thank you, Mike. And thanks to High Time for our technician over here who's going to keep us all sounding great. And thank you guys for showing up. This is really important. I know that last year when we were working on Prop 64 it was pretty controversial, some aspects of it. But it did pass, and I'm glad personally. And I'll start off by introducing the panel. To my left, your right from me is Ellen Comp. She's the Deputy Director of California NORML. Ellen and I have worked together since the early 90s, so we have a very long track record of working on different projects together. And she's one of the more knowledgeable people on a lot of the different things that are going on out there. And she's going to be telling you about that California NORML is doing a lobbying day. And so hopefully we're going to get more people to Sacramento tomorrow to do that. And then on the other end of the table here is Xenia Gilg, one of the top marijuana legal defense attorneys in the country. And she's going to fill you on some of the legal issues and what's going on in the federal issue, what there is in terms of protection for the feds. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. We worked together since somewhere in the 90s. I'm not exactly sure when we started working.
Were you involved in the one first case?
No. Okay, so she that was Lundgren v. Perone, that one? Yeah, so she worked on the Lundgren v. Perone case there, Dennis Perone. I'm sure a lot of you know from Proposition 215 thing. So that was, I think, 97 and 98. So we've been doing this for a long time. And so I'm going to start off with this, and then I'm going to hand it to Ellen, and then Xenia's going to wrap it up, and then we're going to take questions and have conversation. So let me just start off by saying that Prop 64 was a culmination of a lot of effort. We worked, and Ellen worked on a lot of these same things with me. Prop 215, which created a legal defense for patients and their caregiver for two things, possession and cultivation of marijuana. And then we worked in the legislature, and 7 years later they passed Senate Bill 420, the number being not exactly a coincidence, but certainly significant to a lot of us in this room, that it created a legal defense for people who worked in collectives, for people who, patients who sold and grew for other patients, and transported marijuana around the state and things like that. But it had a little snag in it where one part of it said nonprofit and another part did not say nonprofit. And so that's led to an endless amount of time in court with people like Xenia fighting to defend that. And then we've got a bunch of local initiatives around the state, which we call the lowest law enforcement priority initiatives. The first one that happened in the 70s, but it happened again in the 2000s. And the first one was Oakland, Measure Z, that made even possession, cultivation, and sales of marijuana the lowest law enforcement priority. And that led to the opening of what we call Measure Z clubs, where people were buying and selling, and you didn't have to be a patient. But it was really just tolerated because it was a local ordinance. And then in 2010, we have Proposition 19 on the ballot. Now, a lot of people said, well, that's a good sign because the number Proposition 19 was the number of the first marijuana initiative filed in the United States that got on the ballot, which was in California in 1972. And I said, well, the problem with that is that Proposition 19 lost in 1972. So we're having the same number as the one that lost. And then sure enough, we lost, but we came pretty close, 46.5% yes vote on that one. And then came a lot of initiatives. People started filing initiatives left and right. And in 2015, there were something like 17 initiatives filed. 16 of them were pro-legalization. One was trying to shut down the medical marijuana program. A lot of fighting and a lack of unity. Some of us were working with the California Reform, thought that was going to make the ballot. But in a sudden turn of events, a billionaire and the guys who found a weed map came up with a fund, and they put it behind a different initiative, which got the number 64. And so 64 is going to be significant to us because that was the number of the Colorado initiative that was passed in 2012. So we said, well, this is the same number as the first legalization initiative that passed in the country, much better number. And then we want, not that I'm superstitious, mind you, I don't want to give you the wrong impression, but along came. You might read my book about Nostradamus someday if you want to know. But anyway, so then we had, when California's Prop 64 did pass, it was a point of sort of contention. A lot of it, in my opinion, came from the fact that people were backing all these different initiatives and they were upset that it wasn't their initiative. And there were parts of it that because it was a compromise that was made with law enforcement, with parent groups, with the NAACP, and all sorts of organizations that came together to write that language. So that meant that it wasn't just what we wanted, it was what a lot of people wanted, and we didn't all want the same things that came into that. And so when it got passed last year, we got 57.1%, if I'm right about that, 57.1% yes vote on it. So, and the entire Emerald Triangle passed it, etc. What it did was that it created a, legalized a few things, and it downgraded a lot of penalties, and it made it retroactive. And most of the people on this particular panel, we're looking at the social justice side of the issue. But the thing that led up to Prop 64 that a lot of people have to understand is that the legislature rewrote the medical marijuana laws in 2015, and it got rid of the collective defense. The defense that I'm a patient, you're a patient, we can grow together, we can sell to each other. The legislature voted to get rid of that in 2019. And so when Prop 64 came on, they were trying to work with what the legislature did, which was it created the MCRSA, Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. And they set up these regulations for legal distribution of marijuana, and it made the current system basically illegal. And so the initiative, instead of re-changing that again, they incorporated the existing legislative medical marijuana regulations. It made something kind of similar for the non-medical, but it added a couple of things like large-scale grows and what we call a micro-business license, which is kind of similar to what a craft beer or a winery would have, where you can produce and sell and wholesale and market your own, do everything but test your own for purity and potency. And it created that as a special license, which did not exist under the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. But they both have the same situation, which says that in 2019, you're going to have a state and a local license. And so we may have some disagreements about this. I didn't know that before, but okay. A shade of difference. Yeah, a lot of this, when you're talking broad brush strokes, of course, there's nuances that you have to consider as well. But in any case, so the main thing from my perspective, though, as a consumer of cannabis, is that it made it legal to possess 28 grams of marijuana, to possess up to 8 grams of concentrate, and that includes hash oil, super concentrate. And to grow 6 plants per residence, but you have to be, but landlords can tell you if you're a renter you can't grow on their property and stuff like that. Employees can still tell you they don't want you to smoke marijuana. So a lot of what I would think is basic civil rights were not covered by this, but primarily it created a legal availability for us to grow and give away marijuana to each other. That includes transportation, and sales would have to be licensed, but transportation, sharing, and possessing all these sort of things is now legal here in California, which it never was before. It created a regulatory system which is kind of similar, as I said. Now, where we went to the issue again with the federal government, though, is that the federal government, because they have the Interstate Commerce Act, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the courts have been very clear that the federal government can regulate or prohibit sales of marijuana. They're not as clear about it prohibiting it, but they do anyway for cultivation, but they cannot make California change its laws. So basically, in other words, the fact of people being able to possess and grow and share 6 plants, 8 grams of concentrate, and an ounce of marijuana, the feds can't do anything about that. That's just the way it is. However, they can come in, they can interfere with our medical distribution system or with our non-medical distribution systems. So this is where the real hazard, from my perspective, from the federal government is not that they're going to come and look in your backyard. People who are going to come and look in your backyard are going to be the local regulators and the local cops and the things like that, or mostly your nosy neighbor and things like that. So you're just going to have to be discreet. Another thing I need to point out about the personal cultivation, and by the way, we have a list here that shows you what the old laws were, what the new law does, and it explains on the back how the Prop 64 works. That No, I'll just keep moving on because by stopping to show you that I lost my chain of thought. So that just moving right along though, it set it up so that the legislature can make changes with a 2/3 vote, but it can't recriminalize marijuana. Okay, because it has to be consistent with the purposes of the initiative, and the initiative was to legalize marijuana. So they can't make it illegal and say that that was consistent. Will never pass muster in the courts. But what they can do is make life miserable for us. Oh, I know what I was talking about when I lost my chain of thought, is that so the local governments can ban sales, they can ban home grows, but only outdoors. They can't ban greenhouses, and they can't ban indoor cultivation. So unfortunately, from my perspective, I've always felt like the whole thing about legalized marijuana is that we shouldn't have to use electricity and fossil fuels to grow weed, you know? So what they've done is set it up so that, and a lot of local governments are now making it restrictive so that you have to grow indoors or something like that. And to me, I don't think they're doing environmental impact reports or anything. So we're going to have some battles, we can fight on that, but right now we're seeing them go in that direction. A lot of what's going to happen though is going to be complaint driven. In other words, there might be some cops who are sitting on the internet looking at Google Earth and finding out who's got marijuana growing in their backyard. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of that, but what is going to happen is your next door neighbor that you're having a fight with, if you've got some plants in your backyard and the local ordinance says it has to be indoors, that's the person who is probably going to call and cause a problem for you. So moving forward, people who grow for themselves and who share with their friends are going to have to be a little more cautious about that. The medical marijuana stuff in Prop 215 is still protected. As I said, SB 420, they basically eviscerate the most important part of it. So, you know, there's really nothing to protect there anymore at this point. So then let me just move next, because I'm going to get to what Ellen and Xenia have to say and have more of a roundtable discussion. I want to talk about another 64, and that is Assembly Bill 64. Because what happened when they came along, as I said, the legislation needs a 2/3 vote to pass changes. So there were 43 or 42 bills introduced into the legislature this past year. One of them was to stop state law enforcement from cooperating with the federal government. And that just passed the other day, from what I understand, of the Assembly, but I don't think it's made to the Senate yet. And that would be a huge deal. So it's make California a sanctuary state for cannabis. The other thing, though, is that there were a whole bunch of these different bills that were put out there, but one of the first ones that come out was Assembly Bill 64. And since they need a 2/3 vote to get things through here, the thing that I was warning people about last year seems to have come into fruition, which is that the legislature, all these little bills that they couldn't get 2/3 support for any one of them by itself, they combine them all, and so that a bunch of legislators, now they have a vested interest in getting this bill passed, and it's a big omnibus bill. Some parts are good, and some are not good, and so I'm going to quickly go over some of the points of this, and then hand it over to Ellen for the next part of this. But what this does is, for one thing, it specifies that medical marijuana facilities can operate for profit. Which I thought the Cursa did, but apparently it did the same thing where it didn't exactly say one way or the other. So this is making it clear, straightforward. It does allow for profit. It also allows for non-storefront locations. The way that the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act was written, to be a delivery service, you had to get attached to a dispensary. Now you won't have to because of this bill. It changes the Section 1070, the Evidence Code. I'm looking at Xenia because I don't know what that means. but in any case, I'm just kind of poking with that. It clarifies that the micro business license, that's one I told you was like a microbrewery or a winery type of a thing. It says that now it makes it clear that that does not authorize the distribution of marijuana products except for those produced at the site. So if you start your own micro business and you're growing it and processing it and packaging it, selling it, wholesaling it, and so forth, you can't then bring in your neighbor's products under this bill, okay, the way it stands now. And this is what lobbying day is about. We're going to try to get certain changes. And this is one of those things that I would say, I would like to see that, this is one of the changes I want to see happen in there, is that micro businesses can market other small businesses' products instead of just their own. The next thing is that it expands the prohibition on advertising or marketing of marijuana along roadways and stuff like that. Prop 64 said no, you can't advertise on roads, interstate highways or roads leading out of the state, and that's because I mentioned it's the Interstate Commerce Clause that the federal prohibition is based upon. So this is to protect us from that. Well, they're trying to expand it to any state road. You couldn't have any marijuana advertising. And I think there's a First Amendment constitutional issue that bumps into on the one hand, but on the other hand, I would just like to see it so that why should you be able to see prescription drugs advertised on the freeway and alcohol and cigarettes and not marijuana? That doesn't seem right to me. So this is another thing that I'm going to encourage people to go in there and talk about. And then the next thing is that it says that if the state issues you a license and gets a report that you're not compliant with the local licensing, they contact the local government, and if they have 90 days to get back, and if the local government doesn't tell the state that you're violating their provisions, you're deemed to be legal. And I think this is a really good positive for us, because that means that, that they can't just come back and after you've been in business for a year, then they say, oh, these guys aren't operating lawfully. They have 90 days to tell the state that you're not. The next thing is that it authorizes trademarks. Federally, you can't trademark your marijuana products, but what it's going to do is create a state trademark that you can do. The next thing that it does is it advances money to the CHP to go and harass marijuana people. What? Oh, that's just some studies?
Well, yeah, I think those, and then they never pull that out, actually.
Okay, but anyway, put it this way, Prop 64 authorized that, so all they're saying is that they don't have to wait for the Prop 64 taxes to pay for it, whatever that all entails. But you're right, it is a $3 million, so that would be the studies on driving under the influence or impaired driving, and I'll let Ellen explain more about that. The other thing is that it adds a bunch of separate offenses for driving under the influence. It separates under the influence of marijuana from under the influence of alcohol and marijuana, from under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, or another drug, for the instances of alcohol and a drug other than marijuana. So they're going to create 4 different DUI offenses. The important thing to us is that the DUI offense, as far as marijuana is concerned, is tied to this. They have to show impairment. They tried to change that this past year, but that bill did not make it through, where they would not have to show impairment. But luckily, and I give California NORM a lot of credit for this, they fought that back. And then I'll just have a few more things to mention. One is that it authorizes collectives and cooperatives to operate for profit or not for profit. Remember, they voted to get rid of the cooperatives and collectives under Prop 64, under SB 420 when they passed the McPhersa. However, what they've done is they've reintroduced them, but you just have to deal with the same regulations as other groups. But you can still operate as a cooperative or collective, but you still need your local and your state license. And then the other thing is it creates an unspecified sum of money for enforcement against cultivation, dispensing, and manufacturing of marijuana products in violation of state or local laws. 2 important things to know about that is we changed the state laws from being felonies to being misdemeanors across the board pretty much, except for sales to minors under the age of 18. And the other thing is that it if people are multiple offenders or aggravating offenses such as destroying the environment or selling marijuana that's contaminated and stuff like that, that could still be treated as a felony, and Jeannie is going to explain to you more about that. Now, I just want to point out a couple of other little things at the very end here, which is that it definitely allows for delivery services. It definitely makes it so that places can operate for profit. But one of the things I don't like is that they're the initiative said that you can't transport marijuana in an open container for non-medical use. It didn't explain what an open container meant. So now the legislature, and this is from Bonton Wood, 2 people, local assembly people that you should be working on if they're from this in their Emerald Triangle. These are a couple of your representatives that we need to work on that. They want to make it so that means it has to have the manufacturer's seal on it, and it has to be either locked in your trunk or in your glove compartment. Now, when you grow your own, you don't have a manufacturer's seal. So right off the bat, that seems unconstitutional on its face because it means you can't transport your own marijuana, which the initiative says you can, okay? But the other thing is that I think it should be just the opposite. Instead of saying what you can do, which is say that you can't transport it in visible, what do you call it, but the police can see it easily, that expression again. Plain sight, yeah. You can't have it in plain sight, and it can't be, the bag can't be open, and you can't have a joint in your ashtray. That's what open container means, because I think that's what most of us were thinking of. Not that if you have something in a plastic seal-a-meal bag in your glove compartment, that's an open container, because it's not. And so this is an area we need to fight on. And speaking of the fight, that brings me to Ellen Kahn. She's been fighting a long time, sometimes with me. And she's going to tell you what Normal's take is on these and some other bills that are out there and what the strategy is moving forward.
Well, they were respectful fights when we fought, yeah. Hi, thanks everybody for being here, and we've had a wonderful weekend at our booth. We have a booth right here on the way into the 215 area, so stop by if you have a chance afterwards. We've got newsletters and stuff. If you don't know what NORMAL is, it's the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's been in existence since 1970, and I'm with the California branch, which has been around since 72. And we're your lobbyists in Sacramento for your personal rights, mainly, and ancillarily for reasonable regulation and taxation as well in the industry. So we've been working on, he's right, we've been working on drivers' issues since I got involved in the 90s. Started with the feds passing these smoke a joint, lose your license laws, saying that if you got caught with any pot, it had a pot charge and you lost your driver's license, and if you didn't have a law saying that they would take away your federal highway funds. So we got a compromise saying, well, you can either do that or you can pass a law and say, no, we're not going to pass this law and we're not going to relinquish our federal highway funds. But we had to get that law passed every year or else we would lose our highway funds. So that's how long we've been fighting on DUIs, and every year they try to come up with a new law to make it an automatic DUI to have any amount of THC in your blood or some kind of per se standard in your blood, and there's really no science behind any of that. Not just because marijuana can stay in your blood or your urine test for 6 weeks if you're a chronic user, but even the blood tests or they're always trying to come up with some new breathalyzer or oral swab test or something that's going to be able to give them a bright line of whether you're impaired or not. And we've been arguing for many years that what we really need instead, we don't want to see impaired drivers on the road either, but what really can tell that, whether instead of a chemical test, is an impairment test. This is true in the workplace and on the roadway. And I have an impairment test on an app on my phone. It's called My Canary, and I can take it. It does a balance test, it does a tracking test, it does a memory test, all the things that marijuana has been shown to impair people slightly, but it does impair people. We're finally, though, since the passage of Prop 64 and all the other advancements we've made, we're finally getting traction on that argument and finally having reporters call me and ask about that argument. And the great victory this year was AB 6, which was introduced by Assemblyman Lackey, who's a Republican from Palmdale and a former CHP officer, to allow for this oral swab testing statewide. He withdrew that bill and instead turned it into a task force to study the issue, including impairment testing. So that was great. And there's another bill, SB 65. So then they try to sneak in stuff on you. They'll introduce the bill and then later they'll amend it and they'll throw in something. You gotta really watchdog these things. And like you said, there's 44 or more bills in the legislature this year. Last year there were 20, which I thought was a lot. The year before there were like 5 or 10. So it's escalating. But SB 65 would have made it taken away a driver's license from someone under 21 if they had any amount of THC in their blood. And that we thought was not, again, a test of impairment, right? And even though it's illegal to use it if you're under 21, if you don't have a doctor's recommendation, they did make an exception for that. It's still unfairly targeting a population that, not for any reason that's going to really impact public safety, we feel. So we've seen some changes in that, and that's one of the bills that we're going to be talking about as Lobby Day tomorrow, which Chris mentioned. That's going to be big. We're excited about that. We're joining with Americans for Safe Access, a group that's dedicated to rights for medical marijuana users. And they've been doing successful lobby days for years, and so we're joining forces with them this year. And we're bringing people from all over the state to, we're having a program in the morning to inform them. We just have all these fact sheets on the different bills that we're targeting, and then we're going to go and have appointments with our assembly people and our senators, and then we're going to party, because that's what we do. And so you're welcome, even if you're not signed up, to show up tomorrow at Sacramento at 9 a.m. The program starts at the Citizen Hotel. And I did not know that it was the weekend, the day after the High Times weekend when we set that. Instead, it's the date where all the bills that started in the Assembly had, by this date, had to have passed the Assembly and are now going over to the Senate. So like AB 64 that he mentioned is one that passed the Assembly, going over to the Senate. And then all the bills that started in the Senate now are going over to the Assembly. So one that Chris mentioned is AB 1578, which this was supported by the Drug Policy Alliance, another one of our allies. And what it would do is it would do this sanctuary state, keep the feds out of California, another way to do it, as well as the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which you might have heard about, which precludes the spending of federal funds on medical marijuana. And we got that extended again this year, at least through September, and that really helps. So that passed the Assembly by a pretty narrow vote. It passed by 9 votes, which is means that about 8 or 9 Democrats voted against it. There was one Republican that voted for it. It was Mr. Lackey, who I mentioned earlier. But like the Democrat from Fresno voted against it. But the one from Modesto voted for it. But some of the other ones. So we're going to go in armed with, okay, like how come you made this vote? Now this was a pretty gutsy vote for anybody to make. It's just basically thumbing your nose at the feds, and especially these feds, right? But even so, we keep our members aware of how their representatives are voting. Mostly, instead of lobbying directly ourselves, we empower our members to lobby their elected officials, because that's who they work for. They work for you, as you've probably heard people say. And so they need to hear from you. And really nothing has more impact than having someone from their district call them with a concern. An example is, you might have heard that up until a couple years ago, you could get thrown off an organ transplant list in California for using medical cannabis. People literally died because of this. And at a lobby day, someone took around one of their fact sheets to their representative, Mr. Levine from Marin, and maybe even here too. From Sonoma, isn't it? Levine? Anyway. And he saw this and decided to take action, and so now it's law in California that a doctor cannot throw you off an organ transplant list just because of your use of medical cannabis. And yeah. Thanks. So that gave me the idea, something that happens to me every month, if not every week. I hear from a patient, a pain patient, who's usually seriously ill or injured, and they're taking opiates because of it, and they see a pain specialist. And they're augmenting their therapy with medical marijuana, which usually means that they can reduce the use of opiates and the marijuana. But pain doctors, it became vogue several years ago to start drug testing again, pain patients before, and making them sign a contract saying they weren't going to get their medicine anywhere else, and making sure they're taking the opiates as prescribed, and blah. Well, when they do the drug test, they do just a general panel test and they pick up THC. And a lot of doctors wrongly think, and we think, amorally think this means they must kick the patient off of their opiate prescription because they're using cannabis. Now, what's coming out more and more, and again, every week we're getting stories about this, it turns out marijuana is serving as a very potent substitute for opiates in the midst of an opiate crisis. There was a study funded by the National Institute of Drug Abuse 2 years ago and published in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, saying that States with medical marijuana programs have 25% fewer opiate overdoses than other states. There's also studies showing it has lower opiate use and abuse. Medicare costs are lower in states that have medical marijuana, and in fact, and also traffic accidents due to opiates. And in fact, the more liberal the program, the better these things are, these parameters. And it's just been stunning. So we have not only a pressing need among patients, but all these studies now coming in, and this crisis on, that is going to help us, we think, get some kind of legislative remedy along the lines of what we got for the organ transplant bill. So we're going to be taking around information for the legislators tomorrow about that, and continuing to work on that through other regulatory channels and things. The second bill that we're going to be looking for an author for is an employment rights bill, because Proposition 64 does not specifically protect employees. In fact, it more specifically protects employers to continue to fire people for using marijuana. And even though we're legal now, and this, as I feared, was many of the first calls I got after Prop 64 passed were people calling me saying, well, I'm drug tested on my job, and I'm legal now. And I had to be the one to tell them, no, unless, your employer can still drug test you, even if you have a medical note in California. And that's because of a ruling called Ross versus Raging Wire that happened several years ago. We got a law passed to change that, but Arnold Schwarzenegger, himself a former marijuana user, vetoed it. And so we think now with the wind at our backs with Prop 64 passing, and as Chris noted, it passed in two-thirds of the counties of California. It passed in a lot of places that earlier efforts did not pass. So we're showing much more widespread support all across California. We think now's the time to at least go for employment rights for medical marijuana patients, because 11 other states right now have it right in their initiatives that it protects them. But we didn't have that in Prop 215 when we passed it, because it's an issue that came up after we passed that law. So that's something we're working on. As far as the regulatory bills, I've heard a lot this weekend. I know people are concerned about the regulations. There's two things. The governor has put out a budget trailer bill that addresses some of the regulations, and then the regulatory agencies themselves, and there are three of them. There's the Bureau of Medical Cannabis Control, which is going to regulate the dispensaries and distribution and that sort of thing, and also testing labs. There's the Department of Agriculture, which is going to be regulating cultivation, and then there's the Department of Public Health, which is regulating things like labeling and potency and stuff. And we're actually working with the California Cannabis Industry Association Manufacturing Committee on a petition, which we have here today, about some of the regulatory aspects of products like edibles. They want to make it so you can't put any dairy in an edible or anything perishable. We can't figure out exactly why that is, maybe to skirt federal law or some other kind of state law, but that's going to really hamper a lot of manufacturers, as well as some of the other provisions, like you can only have a certain amount of grams in your product or in the package of your product, and that might be okay for the recreational market, but may not be satisfying the medical market where people need more, and it'll inconvenience them as well as raise their costs. The governor's trailer bill. Earlier on, the governor was trying to merge in every way he could the medical and the recreational systems for cost containment measures. But this new iteration of what he's come out with actually wants to separate the two, so you'd have to have a separate location to have a medical versus a recreational garden, manufacturing facility, as well as a retail facility. And that's just nuts. I mean, that would... I had just toured a Kiva Chocolates factory in Oakland the day before, and they took me to room after room. Oh, we have this machine that does this, and we have this machine that does this, and here's shipping, and here's this, and I'm thinking, yeah, so they're supposed to set up all of this for the recreational market now? That they have set up here for the medical market, rather than just, maybe packaging or labeling it a little differently, and boom, it's out the door. So think of the cost that that's going to entail for a company to try to set something like that up, and how that's going to impact the consumer, because again, we always come first from the consumer standpoint. So I guess that's about it. I mean, you know, I could talk about local regulations and stuff. Prop 64, as you said, you're going to be able to grow your 6 plants, but the locals can reasonably regulate what that is, and it's going to be up to the courts what reasonable is regarding that. As we know, the locals have been moving to ban cultivation altogether, and the courts in California have ruled that they can for medical. So now by this strange quirk, it's going to be legal to grow 6 plants for your recreational use, but God forbid if it's medical, then it's illegal. I mean, is that nuts? So there's going to be a lot to work out, and we still have to build a lot of local support. I'm very encouraged by the fact that we're getting a lot of people from counties across California that are looking to form normal chapters or other kinds of groups. We've got Tuolumne, we've got, I just heard from Contra Costa, from Siskiyou, Fresno, all around, and this is where the rubber's hitting the road on a lot of these regulations and even taxation issues also. And so I encourage people, I tell you, you have 3 levels of government. You really need to be active at all 3 levels, the federal, the state, and the local. And there's normal chapters on all those levels, so if you go to normal.org, you can find out a lot about where things are at.
All right, thanks a lot, Ellen. There's so much information here. Many panelists could go on forever on this, but luckily Normal's website is very useful. And I also recommend my website, chrisconrad.com, and you can talk to my wife, Vicki Norris, in the back there. She's knowledgeable. But right now, let's move to the second part. Ellen was talking about the different ways, the state, the federal, and the local, but we also have 2 other things available for us here as far as cannabis laws in California. And one of those is the regulatory board, and the other is the courts. And the court situation is rather interesting because things that used to be in the gray area are going to become black and white once the collective defense goes away. But they're going to be misdemeanors instead of felonies, and so the risk is going to be less and so forth. And we're finding a lot of interesting law enforcement approaches, such as felony conspiracy to commit a misdemeanor, which we didn't know existed before, but it's become a big issue now. So let's hand it over to Xenia, who's got the blood on her hands from all these battles in the courts. Sorry about that image, Xenia. Xenia Gill.
It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of the noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. Charles Dickens wrote this passage in 1859, looking back at the French Revolution, which occurred in the late 18th century. 158 years later, it's still appropriate as we move forward on the war on cannabis. I say this because we should be celebrating. I don't want to be a downer. We should be celebrating here in California. We passed Prop 64. We've moved the black market marijuana world into the high-tech, high-finance, highly respected arena of a normal business. We've proven and shown that cannabis is a medicine. So I don't want to be a downer, but I don't want us to get complacent. Because Jeff Sessions says, good people don't smoke marijuana. Mr. Sessions, have you met Matt Fiji, the father of little Charlotte in Colorado, whose seizures disorders were cured by cannabis? Matt Fiji says, I want to scream from the rooftops. I want other people, other parents to know that marijuana is a viable option for their children suffering from seizure disorders. But Jeff Sessions says he thought that the KKK were okay until he learned they smoked pot. Mr. Sessions, did you know that John Ehrlichman, a former domestic policy advisor to Richard Nixon, of all people, admitted that the Republicans used the war on drugs to criminalize black people? Now maybe the KKK does, or maybe they don't, use marijuana. But as one narcotics detective told me many years ago, I've never gone to a domestic violence call and the guy's sitting there smoking a joint. So maybe the KKK should be smoking pot. Jeff Sessions says you can't have a president of the United States of America talking about marijuana. You are sending a message to young people that there is no danger in this process. It is a false that marijuana doesn't lead people to more drug use. It is already causing a disturbance in the states that have made it legal. Yes, it is a disturbance, and I'll tell you what that disturbance was, and Ellen pointed it out. People are not taking opioids. People are not dying from opioid overdoses. They aren't taking heroin. Mr. Sessions says that heroin is only slightly less awful than marijuana. I mean, marijuana is only slightly less awful than heroin. Well, Mr. Sessions, I would say that marijuana is only slightly less awful than aspirin. More people die from aspirin than have ever died from marijuana. So let's not get complacent. Even in the state courts, as Chris points out, we're hitting against a wall of an inability to see where this movement has gone to. We have prosecutors and we have police officers who are rejecting and who are lashing out at the fact that this is becoming a legitimate business. We can't become complacent. I have DAs charging everything they can think of, conspiracy to commit a misdemeanor. I have a DA charging in Southern California of elder abuse because some of the patients were older. We haven't arrived yet. We're getting there, but we haven't arrived yet. And now with the federal backlash, we must not become complacent. Now, what do? Yes, we go to the rallies, we go to the marches, we lobby the state legislature, but more importantly, what we do is we implement Prop 64 with dignity. Nobody wants to deal with these regulations. Nobody wants to have to get a permit and a license and have to go to the water board and comply with the environmental requirements and make sure that their product is tested. Nobody wants that. We've been living in a free, this is not the kind of thing that we like to do, right? It's not us. But if we're going to prove to the rest of the world, or at least to the rest of the country, that this can be implemented and that this can be a benefit not only to the people of the state of California, but to the government, too, in the pulling in of taxes. And if we can garner the respect of other industries, then we win. So now there's a lot of nuances with all the laws and the regulations, and I'm happy to answer questions. Of course, I'm a lawyer, so I can't really give legal advice. So I want to open this up to questions, but please, please don't become complacent. Don't sit here and go, we've won, we're there, we're not there yet. Because I'll tell you one thing the federal government can do. I don't think they're going to come in and arrest people. I think that ship sailed, that horse is out of the barn, or however you want to put it. But what they can do is they can link funding to states licensing cannabis dispensaries, particularly in the recreational area. And just like they're trying to do with the sanctuary cities. So again, we need to show our legislatures that we know how to do this and we're going to do it right. And if you don't want a backlash from your citizenry and the people who voted you into office, then you better stand up to the federal government and people like Jeff Sessions who are living, I don't know, they're living in the age of Charles Dickens. So I'll open it up to questions now.
If you have a question, please line up here. And so remember, you've got the Bureau of Medical Regulations, Medical Cannabis Regulations. They have their new policies. You need just a couple weeks left, right, to give input.
You have public comment period until June 13th or the 20th on the lab regulations, or I think the 14th on the cultivation ones, but 13th is the first day deadline. And yeah, you can make your comments by email or letter or however, or go to one of the hearings. They're having hearings around the state, and those are listed at the California site and at their site.
Okay, and then you can go to the lobby day, information on California Normal's website. We need people phoning your state and your local officials. If Dianne Feinstein is an order to us, I'd like to see her replaced in the Senate, but in the meantime, we have to keep putting pressure on her. And the other thing to do is call your state assembly and senators. And let's take the first question.
So I apologize if it's less of a question for you, but yeah, maybe you might be able to help me out. So yesterday in the seminars, we had Debbie, and I apologize for forgetting her last name, from Magnolia.
Debbie Goldsberry.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. But she had mentioned just briefly that some businesses are mandatory need to place a, is it 65? That cannabis causes cancer? Is there?
Oh, she's talking about that Prop 65 is this California thing that says everything causes cancer, so everything has to be labeled. And it includes marijuana, but it's like those signs, every time you walk into a building, there's a sign that says California has determined this building causes cancer. So on the one hand, yeah, it's a drag. On the other hand, Prop 65 is so over the top that people you don't even read those signs. Who remembers the last time they walked into a building and saw that sign? It's like, yeah, there we go. But most people you don't even know.
Next time you go into Starbucks, look, they have one. Right by all of the cream and sugar and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a drag, but I don't think it's that big of an issue, frankly. I mean, it's offensive. Yeah, that is. But
It was the offensive part. I didn't know if there was any way we could also help fight that and removing that, or they have to put it at the very front.
Here's the thing is that, again, it goes back to we want to be part of the legitimate business community. And a lot of this stuff rubs us the wrong way. This isn't like what we do. And, it's not who we are. But the bottom line is, it's just about every business has to have that sign. And so, if we're going to be a business, we're going to have that sign.
That's great. Yeah, that was my question. Thank you so much.
So I agree with you. I find it offensive myself, and if people in the lobby to try to get that taken down. But it's like I said, when you walk into the grocery store, they have a sign that says that. When you walk into a coffee shop, they have a sign that says that. It's not really that big of a deal. It's just annoying.
Yeah, if you're going to blend in, you need to blend in.
Yeah, right. I thank you for that point. Next question.
So this is about, I think it was about Assembly 64. You said so mobile dispensaries don't need to be attached to a physical dispensary address anymore. Is that what you were saying?
Well, that's in the bill that was passed by the Assembly and it's going to the Senate right now.
Okay, but that is what you were saying. If it passes, then mobile dispensaries won't need to be attached to a physical dispensary address?
That's correct. You still need your license, your state and your local licenses, but not a building.
When I'm in Southern California, they seem to all be mobile dispensaries, but they are attached to some physical address.
Right, that's because it used to be, the bill that was originally written said you had to have the dispensary to have a delivery service.
Okay, great.
So this changes that rule.
And can I just say one thing about the AB 64? Because what happens when it goes to the Senate, it might be changed. And so you've got to really pay attention because what Chris is saying now is not law yet.
I understand there might be
Yeah.
some negotiations or concessions.
Yeah.
Got it, okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so there's some things we want to keep, but there's some things we want to change, and so we're going to be talking about that as we go forward. Yes, next question.
Hey, thank you for talking. So I have a question about the recreational regulations that are going to come out. Do you think that the testing requirements are going to be as strict as the ones that are on medical? And do you think that the requirements that are on medical marijuana production will push more people to the recreational sort of production? So the requirements of like pesticide testing and like heavy metal testing that they have on the...
Well, the regulations that have been released are just for medical, but they're thinking that they're going to be very similar for recreational. So that, I guess, remains to be seen, if I understood your question correctly. Some of the concerns, like the pesticide limits are like 100 times stricter than in other states that are going to be a little difficult. And some stuff like that might be more appropriate for medical patients and less so for recreational, I don't know. And so that all needs to be worked out and looked at. And, you know, I just heard Lori Ajax, who's the head of the BMCR, speak last week, and she said, you know, she comes from the alcohol industry. She said it can take years to really iron out some of these regulations. It's actually happening at lightning speed for marijuana, something that's never been regulated before, and no one really knows how to do it. So I think there's going to be a lot of fluidity in this, and they are listening. They are, you know, taking hearings. They want input as much as possible. So if you have concerns, you should definitely make them known.
Yeah, it seems like their policy right now is if they're going to make an error, they would rather err on the side of over-regulating and making it hard on us than on the side of letting us get away with something that they may not like later on. But her question, by the way, had to do with the whole thing about all the limits on pesticides which have not been approved, and so how do you know how to use them? Next question.
I have 100, but I'm only going to ask one short one and then a combo. And the first question is, do you guys have cards?
Yeah.
Can I get a card? I guess that's 3 questions. And then my next question is, as it relates to the collectives that are, you know, they're LLCs, right? You know, the collective that they let us do years ago. If you had the card, you could join the collectives. You guys remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I need some affirmative, yeah. And so, as it relates to the religious rights that Donald Trump signed into law, that's one good thing he's done since he's been in office. As it relates to that, are the old style collectives basically null and void, or have you guys considered the relationship between those? I guess that's 100 questions right there.
Actually, I would treat it as just one question, which is that the legislature voted to get rid of it and required this licensing scheme instead. Okay, but now they've said that if you have a collective, that you can fit a collective within the licensing scheme. So it's a mixed answer to what you're saying. The old system is gone, but they're trying to make it so that if you have a collective, that you can easily transfer into the new system of regulations.
Okay, in the religious part of it, can it be classified as, you know, religious?
That man in the White House did nothing for marijuana. That thing he signed is not going to help marijuana patients.
Yeah, in order for that to work, you'd have to have a marijuana religion, which you can now in California, and then you raise money and then spend it on political causes. That's what he changed, is that churches can now spend money directly on politics.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and unfortunately they said they only have one more question, so the lady with the pink, I'm sorry, we can talk to you over at the side afterwards. So,
Yeah, sorry, we just have time for one more question.
one more question.
Hi, thank you so very much for coming today. I'm a medical doctor out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I moved here, and it looks like I'm going to be doing this now with my son. Thank you very much. I'm excited, but I'm nervous, and I have to be honest with the federal guidelines and what we're kind of looking at. I want to do a full-fledged 5 licenses. I want to cultivate. We're looking at land, just the schematics of everything. How much concern should I honestly put into? I know we're not a sanctuary state just yet, and I know the Assembly did pass that particular, I think, crop. But
I think what you're asking is what kind of federal exposure you're giving yourself.
Yes.
And the answer to that is, right now there's part of the budget bill out of Congress, U.S. Congress, says that the Department of Justice, which is what Jeff Sessions is, cannot spend money on investigating or prosecuting people who are complying with their state medical laws, okay? It doesn't say recreational, it says medical laws, okay? And then it lists California as one of them. That keeps getting reinstigated each time they do the budget bill, but that only is good until September, and then who knows what will happen, okay? So that's a temporary reprieve. The other thing to be very aware of is that doesn't keep the IRS off of you. It's only the Department of Justice, okay? So if these people in Washington wanted to go crazy, they could come here and they could do forfeitures, they could do tax cases, and I can tell you the IRS has their own marijuana task force, so they could charge you with a mandatory minimum still. That's what I'm saying, don't get complacent. Okay, now will they do that? I think that's very unlikely. But you need to be aware that it's not over. And so another thing that we've got to do is we've got to change the Congress in 2018. We've got to get out there and vote. Get those people out.
All right, everybody. Unfortunately, we're over time, but let's hear it one more time for a Prop 64.